You can see here, clam 2, tap. Now I'm going to bring in row 1, and I need to find it, and there's clam 1. That is row 1. Load that on. We'll move our quilt aside here, and we're ready to position it in our area. So go to Quilt and Reposition, and I want to zoom in on this and do Follow so that I can move my machine. Zoom in on that, and I want to position it from that point. I'm going to grab that corner, so I'm going to drag from there, drag from here, and now looking at my fabric, I'm going to take my hopping foot over and place it in that top corner. And if I want to, I can lower my needle to see that it's in that corner, and it is. Now I press Move Pattern, and it places that corner right in the corner where the needle is. Now it's time to stitch. So I'm going to press Done, but first off I want to bring that needle out of the fabric, and then we'll go to Run Quilt. But before we start quilting, we might want to check this out on our fabric and make sure that everything is positioned correctly. And once we've finished that, we can go ahead and run our quilt and start quilting. Tie-offs, pull up, and my stitching, very important. I want to check my settings. I have it stitching at 50%. I like to stitch a little slower to start to make sure things are okay. I have it stitching at 10 stitches per inch. We're ready to start quilting. It will move to my start point, take its first stitch, disable the motors so that I could push that aside, and now resume. It will do my tie-offs. Now it will stitch my clamshells across my quilt. It's finished my last clamshell, and it will tie off. I can disable my motors and move my machine aside and trim my threads. Now it's time to bring in row number 2. Go to Load Pattern. Remember, I didn't lose row number 1. I have it saved. It's in my library. So I'll go to row number 2, clam 2, and load it. And there's row number 2. Now we know that it is 1 clamshell too big, but I have to offset it. So what that means is it's going to be a half a clamshell too big on the left and a half a clamshell too big on the right. So I can do one of two things. I can let it stitch off, or I could crop both sides so that it's exactly the same. So maybe what we'll do is we will let it stitch off one side, and I will crop the other side so that you can see how both of them look. So if this is on an overall quilt, make sure that if you want it to stitch off that extra part, then you want to make sure that you have enough batting and backing so that it will stitch into that without having a problem on your running off the quilt at all. Okay, so first of all, let's crop our left side, and then let's let the right side stitch off. So the first thing we want to do is on our screen, we want to go to Quilt, and we want to crop. And let's enlarge this and push follow so that we can see right where that is. Let's put that down there. And what I want to do, I know that my one design is 3 inches. So if I put that right there and move that across to looking at, let's go back here to 0 and zoom in on that. Put that at 0 because that's the beginning of my design. And if I move it to 1.5, which is half of 3, 1.5, make sure it's 1.5 on my right here, move that machine. Sometimes you have to hold on to your hopping foot to just stabilize that. I want this line, the horizontal line, out of the design because all I'm working with is the left. So that's my left that I'm going to crop off everything there. I want this out of the picture on the bottom. So I've pushed bottom left and then crop it. And now as we zoom in on that, oops, let's zoom in on that so we can see. You can see how that's cropped. What that will do is, there's my start point still, so it will do a running stitch, stitch up to there, and then it'll start my design. Okay? Ready to position it. So we want to now move this over, go to our screen of positioning, reposition, and first off, I need to zoom in on this. I'm going to do the same positioning as I did before. Drag from here, from this point, looking at the screen. This is my first step of this. Look at the screen, drag from here, and then I'm going to move, and looking at my fabric, I'm going to move my needle over till it's right to the point there, and I can put my needle down to make sure. Then move pattern, and it lined that right up. Okay, now this is important that we want to check with our follow and make sure that as we come over that everything is lined up correctly across the quilt. Especially with those points, we want those to line up. And if I haven't adjusted my quilt or shifted anything, everything should line up. Important to go all the way to the right and make sure that that last one is also lined up. And we are ready to stitch. That looks good. Now, looking at the screen, I have half of that design that we'll stitch out. I could have cropped that off, but we chose to leave it on this way so you can see that that would be outside of the quilt area. So that's going to be my design. So let's go ahead and stitch that out and see how they fit together. We've repositioned it. We're ready to go to run quilt. Run quilt, start quilting. We have our checks where they need to be, our stitch length. We're ready to start quilting. It will move to the start point. I can move that aside and then resume. Do my tie-offs. So it's doing a half of a clamshell, and then it's coming around and picking up right on where it should on that next. So this is offsetting 50% so that that nests right in there together. Now you'll notice that went past, so if it's out into off of your quilting area, that's great. If it's into an area that has a border on this side, then you definitely want to crop that so that it kept it the same width. Now, the next thing we will do is we would bring in row number 1 and position that, stitch that out, then bring in row number 2. So you'll go from row 1 to row 2, back and forth. And if you decide you want to crop that, then you could still have that opportunity to crop that so that they're the same width. Okay, we just stitched out the clamshells, and now I'm going to take that very same design and I am going to show you how you can use it in other applications. On my sample here, I have what we call the fish, so that you can take that clamshell. If you look at it, you can see it, and then we'll take it and we'll turn it over. The other one that you can do is what we call pumpkin seeds. So you do the clamshell across, then you turn it over and you do a 50% offset, and then it nests right up inside of that. So we're going to show you how to do the fish that we lovingly call the fish. So we'll push that aside. I have my design on the screen. I want to resize it to the height of my border that I'm putting it in. So the first thing I want to do is go to resize, and then with that I'm going to move my machine down and find the height of my border and resize it to that. So if I move my hopping foot down, and I want this to be maybe we'll do it so that it's a 1/4 inch inside, right there. I'm going to reset home. That zeroes out my measurement, and I want to find the height. So if I move the hopping foot up right to the hopping foot along the stitching line, it is 1.54, and I want to, for now, keep the aspect ratio. So I'm going to go ahead and push that, and now it will change my design, 1.54 in height and 3.08 in width. These are the measurements I'm concerned with, not this measurement. So, because I'm not working with the width, I'm only keeping the aspect ratio with the height. I'm finished with that, and I am now going to go to repeat pattern, and I'm going to do skew to fit. Now I'm going to move my machine over to the edge of my fabric, the left side, and I want to put my needle right there where the thread is. I'm going to reset home again, and what that does is that zeroes out that measurement, that counter for me, and then we will move this across my border to the right side. Watching what I'm doing on the screen, I'm going to lock my motors when I get to the right edge so that it locks my machine and doesn't change my measurement. Now I don't have my height measurement in here, so I can go ahead and type that 1.54. 1.54. I have now the measurement of that full border that I would like to put my design in. Now it's time to start putting repeats. So if I were to take and put 3 repeats in that, that means it would stretch each one of these to be about 10 inches. So I'll go ahead and do that and see if that's something that I would like. I don't think that's very pleasing to the eye, so I would really like it to be a little shorter and so more repeats. So I'm going to go ahead and double it and put 6 repeats in. And now if I zoom in on this so you can really see that, I think that would look nice, and then to add the next one across or over the top of it. So let's go ahead and position this. That's my 6 repeats, and we'll reposition that to fit within that sashing. Back, reposition. We're going to move, and what I'd like to do this time is actually move my machine over to the top corner of my sashing or my border and put my needle right at that position, and I can go ahead and do a needle down to make sure that hit right on. I like that. And then that's where the start point is on my screen. If we zoom in on that, you can see that that's where the start point is. So if I press the Find Start Point button, it will actually move that start point up there. Okay, we are ready to start quilting, but I still want to follow. I want to go to the right side and make sure that that ends where I want it to. So I needle up, moving my machine across, and I could zoom in if I want and push follow so that I can check each point along to make sure that it's right where it should be. Now as I stitch across, I can really zoom in so I get a real tight shot of that and check with my needle, my half stitch, to make sure that that drops right where I want it to. I like that positioning. Now it's time to start quilting. Done. Make sure my needle is in the up position and run quilt. And if I don't move my machine and just start quilting, the machine will automatically move for me. So we'll go ahead and let it do that. All of my tie-offs are checked, my pull-up, stitching. I like my settings. I'm ready to start stitching. Now it will move the machine to its correct position. Like automation. Okay, now it's going to take my first stitch and I'll move it aside and get my bobbin thread and then resume. We will do my tie off. Now it's coming down, and so I'm going to go ahead and hold this thread up above it so it doesn't get in the way. You see the difference by stretching it? It's the same shape as this one above, but by stretching it, it has given us a whole new look. Now, if we feel like it's not going to come right to where it should, we can also manipulate the fabric a little, just with our hands. That's why sometimes it's nice to go at a slower speed so that as it gets to the end, you can feel like you're in control and you can shift your fabric. Disable my motors, move my machine aside, and clip my threads. One tip that I would definitely encourage you to do is that make sure